No one survives that trial except the human, she mocketh. Morning sun casts long shadows across the crystal spires of Nexus Prime Academy, the most famous school in the galaxy. Students from hundreds of different worlds walked through the massive halls, their alien forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. Some had forearms, others had wings, and a few glowed with their own inner light. Marcus Chen adjusted his simple gray uniform and checked his watch. He was late for the registration ceremony, but that was nothing new. Back on Earth, he was always the guy who showed up at the last minute with grease under his fingernails and a toolbox in his hand. Here, surrounded by the children of galactic royalty and warrior races, he felt even more out of place. The Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with excitement. Today was the day when brave students would sign up for the Crucible Trials, the most dangerous test in known space. Marcus had read about it in the Academy files. Out of every 100 students who entered, only 15 came back alive. The rest became cautionary tales whispered in dormitories. Why would anyone want to do that? Marcus had asked his roommate, a friendly slug-like creature named Bloop who could change colors when he got excited. Glory. Bloop had replied, turning bright. Orange, honor, proof that you are the best of the best. Also, the winner gets access to the Nexus Crystal, which contains knowledge from the old ones. Marcus understood the appeal, but he had simpler reasons for wanting to try. The trial offered a full scholarship to any survivor, and his family back on Earth needed the money. His little sister wanted to be a doctor, and his parents had already spent everything they had just to get him to Nexus Prime. The registration desk stood at the center of the hall, surrounded by students showing off their natural abilities. A Kronari warrior, his skin looking like living metal, lifted a bench with one hand. A group of Zephyrians moved so fast they appeared as blurs. Energy crackled around the fingers of several Etherean students as they practiced their mind powers. Marcus got in line behind a student who seemed to be made of living crystal. The being's faceted surface reflected the light in beautiful patterns, and other students stepped aside respectfully. Marcus checked his registration papers one more time. Name, Marcus Chen. Species, human. Special abilities, none listed. Next, Marcus stepped forward and handed his papers to the registration officer, a bored-looking alien with 3 eyes and purple skin. The officer glanced at the forms, then at Marcus, then back at the forms. Human, the officer asked, as if he had never seen the word before. Yes, sir. From Earth. Yes, sir. The officer's 3 eyes blinked in sequence. And you want to enter the Crucible Trials? Yes, sir. A wave of laughter rippled through the crowd behind Marcus. He turned to see dozens of alien students staring at him with expressions ranging from amusement to disbelief. The crystal being he had been standing behind was now facing him, its surface glowing brighter. Did he just say human? Someone whispered. The little pink things from the outer rim? I heard they can't even fly. The crystal being stepped closer to Marcus, up close. He could see that it was female, with elegant features carved into her transparent face. Her voice rang like singing glass when she spoke. I am Commander Zara Vexithy of the Etherean Empire, she announced, her words carrying clearly across the hall. And you are Marcus Chen, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Zara's crystal features twisted into what might have been a smile. Marcus Chen, the human who thinks he can survive the Crucible Trials. The hall fell silent. Even the registration officer stopped what he was doing to watch. Marcus felt hundreds of eyes on him, and he could sense the telepathic conversations happening around him in languages his mind could not understand. The Crucible has been running for over 1,000 years, Zara continued, her voice getting louder. The greatest warriors of the Kronari Empire have died in its depths. The fastest Zephyrian scouts have been lost in its mazes. The most powerful Etherean minds have been broken by its challenges. She gestured to the crowd around them. Look at us, little human. We have natural armor, enhanced speed, energy manipulation, psychic abilities. We are the children of species that conquered stars while your kind was still learning to make fire. Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment, but he stood his ground. I understand the risks. Commander, do you? Zara's crystalline hand grabbed Marcus's arm. He could feel cold energy flowing from her touch, and suddenly his mind was filled with images. He saw previous Crucible trials, contestants being torn apart by invisible forces, brilliant minds driven to madness, champions reduced to ash. This is what happens to the weak. Zara's voice echoed in his head. The Crucible feeds on fear and failure. It takes everything you think makes you strong and turns it against you. What do you have? Human. What makes you think you can succeed where we have failed? Marcus pulled his arm free, the mental connection breaking. His head spun from the psychic assault, but he managed to stay on his feet. Round him, the crowd murmured in appreciation. Most beings would have collapsed from even a gentle telepathic touch. From Anatherian, I don't know if I can succeed, Marcus said quietly. But I have to try. Zara laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Look at him, she called to the crowd. No claws, no fangs, no natural weapons, no psychic abilities, no energy manipulation, no enhanced anything, just soft, pink flesh and stubborn ignorance. She turned back to Marcus, her glowing eyes meeting his. I will remember to collect what remains of you for study, little human. Perhaps your failure will teach us something about the dangers of primitive stubbornness. The crowd laughed again, but Marcus noticed that some of the sounds were nervous. Rather than amused, he completed his registration, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed him. As he left the hall, he heard Zara's voice behind him, speaking to her fellow Etherians. The human will die first, she said with absolute certainty, probably within the first hour. The Crucible has no patience for weakness. Marcus walked back to his dormitory, his mind racing. He had known this would be difficult, but he had not expected the open hostility. Back on Earth, he had always been the underdog, the maintenance worker who everyone underestimated. But here, he was not just underestimated, he was seen as a joke. That night, Marcus sat at his desk and opened his battered notebook. It was filled with engineering diagrams, repair procedures, and problem-solving techniques he had learned during his years working in Earth's most dangerous industrial sites. He had survived reactor failures, toxic spills, and equipment malfunctions that would have killed anyone who panicked. Maybe Zara was right. Maybe he would die in the first hour. But Marcus had learned long ago that the most dangerous problems were often solved by the most basic solutions. While others relied on their natural gifts, he had learned to rely on his mind, his tools, and his willingness to keep trying when everything seemed impossible. Tomorrow, the Crucible trials would begin, and Marcus Chen, the human everyone expected to fail, would show them what stubborn curiosity could accomplish. The transport pods shot through space like bullets, carrying their precious cargo toward the void maze. Inside his cramped pod, Marcus Chen checked his equipment one more time. His hands moved steadily over the simple tools, a basic scanner, repair kit, emergency rations, and his worn notebook filled with engineering diagrams. Around him, the other contestants prepared in very different ways. Through the pod's small window, Marcus could see the maze materializing before them. It looked like a massive storm made of twisted metal and dark energy, constantly shifting and changing shape. Lightning crackled across its surface, and strange colors that had no names danced through the darkness. The sight would have terrified most people, but Marcus found himself studying the patterns, trying to understand how it worked. Beginning deployment in 30 seconds, announced the automated voice. Remember, contestants, only one may claim the Nexus Crystal. The maze will test everything you are. May fortune favor the worthy. The pods open like flowers, dumping their occupants into the swirling chaos of the void maze. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of artificial gravity taking hold as he landed on what seemed to be solid ground. The air tasted like metal and ozone, and strange sounds echoed from all directions. As his eyes adjusted, Marcus realized he was standing in what looked like the engine room of a massive starship. But something was very wrong. The walls were covered in frost, emergency lights flashed red, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with dangerous energy. A sign on the wall read Reactor Core Level 7 Breach. Authorized personnel only. Most people would have run. Marcus smiled. Meanwhile, in another section of the maze, Commander Zaravexathy materialized in a crystalline chamber that seemed designed for her telepathic abilities. The walls were smooth and reflective, perfect for focusing mental energy. Small creatures scurried in the shadows, exactly the kind of simple mind she could easily control. Pathetic, she whispered, her voice carrying the musical tones of her species. With a casual thought, she reached out with her mind and seized control of the shadow creatures. They froze instantly, their simple brains overwhelmed by her superior telepathic power. The maze thinks these insects can challenge me? She commanded the creatures to scout ahead, their minds now extensions of her own will. Through their eyes, she saw a corridor lined with deadly traps, pressure plates that would trigger energy blasts, walls that would close together to crush anyone caught between them, and pools of acid that bubbled and steamed. Child's play for someone with her abilities. Zara sent her controlled creatures ahead to trigger the traps safely, then walked through the corridor with elegant confidence. Each step was perfectly calculated, each movement a demonstration of her natural superiority. Behind her, the shadow creatures collapsed, their minds burned out by her casual use of their neural pathways. I wonder if the human has died. Yet, she mused, her telepathic voice carrying a note of amusement. Perhaps the maze will preserve his body for study. Back in the reactor section, Marcus was having the time of his life. The deadly radiation was following completely predictable patterns. He had worked with similar containment systems on Earth's space stations. The impossible gravity distortions were just the result of a poorly calibrated artificial gravity generator, and the lethal energy discharges were happening at regular intervals. Like a machine with a timing problem. This isn't a death trap, Marcus muttered to himself, pulling out his scanner and taking readings. This is a maintenance nightmare. He opened his notebook and began sketching the reactor layout. The maze had clearly created this environment by copying designs from real starships, but it had made several basic engineering mistakes. The cooling system was connected backwards, the power flow was completely inefficient, and the safety systems were fighting each other instead of working together. When a massive energy discharge nearly fried him, Marcus didn't try to dodge or use some special power to deflect it. Instead, he traced the energy flow back to its source and found a simple solution, a loose connection in the main power coupling. He pulled out his repair kit and tightened it properly. The energy discharges stopped immediately. "Thank you," Marcus said to the maze, as if it were a malfunctioning machine that had just been fixed. "You're welcome," he continued, deeper into the reactor section, treating each deadly obstacle as a technical problem to solve. When he encountered a chasm that seemed impossible to cross, he didn't try to leap across it with enhanced abilities he didn't have. Instead, he looked around until he found what he was looking for, a section of broken pipe, some cable, and a few metal plates. 15 minutes later, Marcus had built a simple bridge using basic physics and engineering principles. The bridge wasn't pretty, but it was solid and safe. He crossed it carefully, testing each step. In other parts of the maze, the alien contestants were beginning to realize something was wrong. The Kronari warrior, whose natural armor could deflect most weapons, found himself facing creatures that seemed to know exactly where his armor was weakest. The Zephyrian speedster discovered that the maze's guardians were somehow matching her incredible velocity. The energy-wielding contestants watched in horror as their powerful attacks were absorbed and turned against them. The maze was learning from them, copying their abilities and finding ways to counter them. It was like fighting their own reflections that grew stronger with each encounter. Zara felt the first hint of concern as she reached a new section of the maze. The crystalline chamber had given way to a twisted landscape of dark metal and pulsing lights. The simple creatures she had controlled were gone, replaced by something much more complex and dangerous. "No matter," she said, though her voice carried less confidence than before. "I am Etherean. My mind is superior to any challenge this primitive maze can create." She reached out with her telepathic abilities, seeking the consciousness of the maze itself. If she could dominate its mind, she could control the entire environment. It was a bold move, the kind of direct mental assault that had conquered entire planets for her species. The maze's response was immediate and terrible. Instead of a simple mind she could overcome, Zara found herself facing something vast and hungry. The maze's consciousness was like a bottomless pit filled with the dying thoughts of every contestant who had ever failed. Centuries of fear, desperation, and death crashed into her mind like a tidal wave. She screamed and stumbled backward, her perfect mental shields cracking under the assault. For the first time in her life, Zara Vexathy felt truly afraid. Meanwhile, Marcus had reached the end of the reactor section and found something interesting. A maintenance hatch that led deeper into the maze. The hatch was clearly marked with safety warnings and technical specifications. Exactly the kind of thing most contestants would ignore in favor of more dramatic entrances. Marcus read the warnings carefully, ran a few quick calculations, and opened the hatch properly. Beyond it lay a corridor that hummed with the sound of working machinery. The maze's version of a service tunnel. Perfect, Marcus said, shouldering his equipment. Let's see what needs fixing next, as he disappeared into the service tunnel, treating the deadly maze like any other engineering challenge. The maze itself began to experience something it had never felt before: confusion. This human was supposed to be the weakest contestant, the easiest prey. Instead, he was treating its deadly traps like routine maintenance problems. The maze's confusion began to grow into something else, a feeling it had not experienced in centuries of consuming superior alien minds. The maze was starting to feel frustrated. The maze had been feeding for over 3 hours now, and its hunger was growing stronger. In the twisted corridors, where alien contestants struggled for survival, the entity that controlled the void maze was learning terrible new tricks. Every special ability it encountered became part of its arsenal. Every unique power was copied, studied, and turned into a weapon against the remaining participants. Commander Zara Vexathy knelt in the dark corridor, her hands pressed against her temples, as waves of psychic pain crashed through her mind. The elegant confidence she had carried into the maze was cracking like thin ice. Her telepathic abilities, which had made her the pride of the Etherean Empire, were now her greatest weakness. "This cannot be happening," she whispered, her musical voice now harsh with strain. "I am superior. I am Etherean. My mind is perfect." But the maze cared nothing for her pride. Each time she tried to use her telepathic powers, the entity fed her back the dying thoughts of previous contestants. She saw through the eyes of a Kronari warrior as acid ate through his armor. She felt the terror of a Zephyrian speedster as time itself turned against her. Worst of all, she experienced the final moments of other telepaths who had made the same mistake she was making. Now, the maze had turned her greatest strength into a torture device. Every mental probe she sent out returned corrupted with centuries of death and fear. Her perfect psychic shields, designed to protect against other telepaths, were useless against this chaotic storm of absorbed consciousness. "Stop," she gasped, but the maze only fed her more. It showed her the moment when a proud Vorthan psychic lord had tried to dominate its mind, only to be consumed by the feedback. It shared the last thoughts of a celestial mind mage who had believed himself untouchable. Each vision was a lesson in the price of arrogance. Meanwhile, in the service tunnels beneath the maze's main structure, Marcus Chen was having a completely different experience. He had discovered that the maze's maintenance systems were surprisingly well designed, if poorly maintained. The tunnels were clearly marked with safety protocols and technical specifications. Exactly the kind of information that most contestants would ignore. "Fascinating," Marcus muttered, studying a control panel that monitored the maze's power distribution. "This whole place is basically one giant machine. A complicated machine, but still just a machine." He pulled out his scanner and began taking readings. The energy signatures were unlike anything he had seen on Earth, but the basic principles were familiar. Power flowed from generators to distribution nodes, just like in any large facility. The maze's reality warping effects were created by massive processors. that manipulated local space-time, not unlike the gravity generators on human space stations. When he encountered what appeared to be a security checkpoint, Marcus didn't try to sneak past or fight his way through. Instead, he looked for the maintenance override panel. Every secure facility had one. It was basic safety protocol, he found. It behind a simple access hatch, protected by nothing more than a standard lock. The maze's security systems were designed to stop intruders, not maintenance workers. Marcus's approach was so fundamentally different from what the maze expected that its defenses simply didn't recognize him as a threat. Above him, the maze was growing more aggressive with the remaining contestants. The Kronari warrior found himself facing creatures that had somehow learned to pierce his armor. At its weakest points, the Zephyrian speedster discovered that the maze's guardians could now match her incredible velocity. The energy-wielding contestants watched in horror as their attacks were absorbed and reflected back at them with perfect accuracy. But the maze's growing power came at a cost. Each ability it copied required enormous energy to maintain. The entity was like a computer running too many programs at once. It was becoming unstable. Marcus noticed this first. The power readings on his scanner were fluctuating wildly, and several subsystems were showing signs of overload. The maze was consuming more energy than its generators could provide, trying to maintain copied abilities from dozens of different species. "You're going to burn yourself out," Marcus said to the maze. As if it were an overworked reactor he was trying to help. "You need to manage your power consumption better." The maze's response was immediate and violent. The cord around Marcus began to twist and bend, reality itself becoming fluid. Colors that had no names flashed through the air, and gravity suddenly reversed direction. Most people would have been terrified or driven insane by such an assault. Marcus pulled out his notebook and began taking notes. "Interesting," he said, completely calm as the world warped around him. "Local space-time distortion, probably created by manipulating quantum fields. The energy expenditure must be enormous." He treated the reality warping attack like any other atmospheric disturbance, something to be measured and understood rather than feared. When gravity reversed, he simply braced himself against the wall and waited for it to normalize. When the air itself began to glow with dangerous energy, he checked his radiation detector and noted that the levels were actually quite safe. The maze's confusion was growing into something approaching panic. This human was supposed to be the weakest contestant, the easiest prey. Every other participant had entered the maze with confidence in their superior abilities, making them perfect targets for the entity's feeding process. But Marcus had no special abilities to copy, no natural superiority to exploit. Worse, he was treating the maze's deadliest attacks like routine technical problems. When faced with a section where the walls themselves had become alive and hostile, Marcus didn't try to fight them. Instead, he looked for the power coupling that was feeding energy to the organic conversion system and simply shut it down. The living walls returned to normal metal immediately. "There we go," Marcus said, making a note in his book. "Biomechanical conversion systems are always unstable. You really shouldn't try to run them at full power." In her section of the maze, Zara felt the entity's growing frustration through her damaged psychic connection. The maze was actually getting angry, something she had never thought possible. Its rage was like a storm in her mind, and she realized with growing horror that she was witnessing something unprecedented. The maze was afraid, for the first time in centuries. The entity that had consumed thousands of the galaxy's greatest warriors was facing something it couldn't understand or control. Marcus wasn't just surviving its attacks, he was helping it work better, treating its deadly traps as maintenance issues. To be resolved, the maze tried a new approach. It began showing Marcus visions of Earth under attack, his family and friends in danger. Anything to provoke an emotional response it could feed on. It had used this technique countless times before, turning contestants' love for their homeworlds into weapons against them. Marcus looked at the visions with interest, then pulled out his scanner to take readings of the holographic projectors. "Creating them, nice resolution," he said appreciatively. "The emotional manipulation algorithms are pretty sophisticated too." but you're using way too much processing power for this. A simple fear response would be much more efficient. He began sketching improvements to the maze's psychological warfare systems, completely missing the point that they were supposed to be attacking him. The maze's confusion was complete now. It had never encountered a mind that responded to its attacks by trying to help it work better. Marcus wasn't fighting the maze, he was trying to fix it, and somehow, that was the most terrifying thing the ancient entity had ever experienced. In the deeper sections of the maze, where the most dangerous challenges waited, something unprecedented was happening. The maze was beginning to question its own purpose. For centuries, it had consumed the galaxy's superior species, growing stronger with each feeding. But now it faced something that didn't fit its understanding of how the universe worked. A creature that succeeded not through superior abilities, but through simple competence and willingness to learn. The maze was starting to realize that it might have been wrong about everything. Chat controls Sonnet 4. Marcus Chen had been inside the maze for 6 hours now, and he was starting to understand its true nature. What had seemed like a supernatural death trap was actually an incredibly complex machine, built with technology far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. But even the most advanced machine followed basic principles of engineering and physics. The deeper he went, the more obvious it became that the maze was not just testing the contestants, it was feeding on them. Energy readings showed massive power spikes whenever someone died or gave up in despair. The maze was literally eating the life force and psychic energy of everyone who failed its challenges. "You're not a test," Marcus said to the maze, as if it were a person he was having a conversation with. "You're a predator. A very complicated predator, but still just a predator." He had reached a section that looked like the inside of a massive computer core. Towers of crystal and metal stretched up into darkness, pulsing with strange lights. Information flowed through the structures like water through pipes, and Marcus could feel the maze's consciousness all around him, watching and waiting. The maze had given up trying to kill him with traditional traps. Instead, it was now attempting to understand him, probing his mind with gentle touches that most people would never notice. But Marcus had spent years working with sensitive equipment, and he recognized the sensation of being scanned. "That tickles," he said, pulling out his scanner to take readings of the psychic probe. "Your scanning protocols are pretty invasive, though. You might want to reduce the power by about 30%. To avoid detection, the maze's probe immediately adjusted its power levels, following his suggestion automatically. Then it seemed to realize what it had done and withdrew in something that felt like embarrassment. Elsewhere in the maze, the surviving contestants were facing their worst nightmares. The Kronari warrior had been stripped of his armor and was now fighting creatures that seemed to know every combat technique his species had ever developed. The Zephyrian speedster found herself trapped in a bubble of slow time, watching helplessly as the maze's guardians moved at normal speed around her frozen form. Only 12 contestants remained from the original 100, and most of them were barely clinging to sanity. The maze had grown fat on their fear and desperation, its power reaching levels that would have been impossible when the trial began. But there was a problem. The maze's hunger had made it predictable. Marcus had been studying the patterns of energy flow throughout the structure, and he was starting to see how the maze thought. It expected its prey to fight back with superior abilities. It fed on the moment when someone's natural advantages failed them, when their confidence turned to despair. The maze was like a shark that had learned to hunt only one type of fish. It was perfectly adapted to consume beings who relied on their innate gifts. "You've never encountered a species like mine before, have you?" Marcus asked the maze directly. "Everyone else who comes here is born with special abilities. They're naturally superior to humans in some way. But we humans are different. We're not superior to anyone. We just learn to be good enough." The maze's response was a wave of confusion that Marcus could feel through his scanner. The entity was trying to understand how a species with no natural advantages could have reached the stars. In its experience, only the strongest and most gifted species achieve interstellar travel. Marcus began explaining while he worked on bypassing a security door. "See, that's where you're wrong. We didn't reach the stars because we were superior. We reached them because we were stubborn. When we couldn't fly, we built airplanes. When we couldn't breathe in space, we built life support systems. When we couldn't travel faster than light, we built generation ships and took the long way." He paused to rewire a control panel, treating it like any other maintenance job. "Every problem we've ever faced, we've solved it by learning and adapting. We're not the strongest or the smartest or the most psychic. We're just really good at not giving up." The maze was beginning to understand something that terrified it. Every other species it had encountered had entered the trial with confidence in their natural superiority. When that superiority failed them, they fell into despair. And the maze could feed on that despair. But Marcus had no natural superiority to lose. He had entered the maze expecting to be outmatched. And he was solving that problem the same way humans had always solved problems, by learning and adapting. The maze couldn't feed on the failure of abilities Marcus had never claimed to have. In her section of the maze, Commander Zaravexathy was experiencing the full horror of the entity's feeding process. Her telepathic connection to the maze meant she could feel every moment of death and despair from the past centuries. She watched through the eyes of a celestial battlemage as his cosmic powers were turned against him. She felt the final thoughts of a Vorthan psychic lord as his mental shields crumbled. But something new was happening. Through the maze's shared consciousness, she could sense Marcus's progress. The human was moving through the maze's deepest levels, not by overpowering its defenses, but by treating them as systems to be understood and improved. "Impossible," she whispered, her voice broken by hours of psychic assault. "He's just a human. He has no gifts, no superiority, no right to succeed where greater beings have failed." But as she watched Marcus work, Zara began to understand something that shook her to her core. The maze wasn't just testing individuals, it was testing entire philosophies of existence. Every species that had failed had done so because they believed in their own natural superiority. They had entered the maze expecting their gifts to carry them through. Marcus had entered the maze expecting to have to figure it out as he went along. The maze was now actively trying to challenge Marcus in ways that would trigger an emotional response. It created illusions of Earth being destroyed, showing him his homeworld burning under alien attack. It projected images of his family and friends dying, calling out for his help. It offered him visions of power and glory if he would just give up his humble approach and try to dominate the maze through force. Marcus observed each illusion with professional interest, taking notes on the holographic projection systems and psychological manipulation techniques. When the maze showed him Earth under attack, he commented on the realistic detail of the explosions. When it projected his family in danger, he complimented the emotional resonance algorithms. "You're really good at this," he told the maze. "But you're making the same mistake everyone else makes about humans. You think we're driven by fear or ambition or pride, but that's not what got us to the stars." He reached the end of another corridor and found a massive blast door that would have stopped most armies. Instead of trying to break through it, Marcus looked for the maintenance access panel. He found it right where basic safety protocols said it should be. "What got us to the stars?" he continued as he worked on the door's locking mechanism. "Was curiosity. We wanted to know what was out there. We wanted to understand how things worked. We wanted to learn." The blast door opened with a soft hiss, and Marcus stepped through into the maze's heart. Behind him, the maze's consciousness recoiled in something that might have been recognition. For the first time in centuries, the entity was beginning to remember why it had been created, and it was starting to realize that it had been waiting for Marcus all along. Marcus Chen stood at the center of the void maze, surrounded by technology that defied understanding. Massive crystalline structures rose around him like the pillars of an ancient cathedral, each one pulsing with energy that seemed to contain entire universes. At the very center of the chamber sat what could only be the Nexus crystal, a perfect sphere of light that seemed to hold all the colors that had ever existed. But Marcus barely glanced at the crystal. His attention was focused on the massive technological construct that surrounded it. This wasn't just the maze's power source. It was its brain, its heart, and its memory all combined into one incredible machine. "Hello," Marcus said to the construct, the same way he might greet a new piece of equipment on his first day at work. I'm Marcus. I think we need to talk. The response was immediate. The chamber filled with a presence so vast and ancient that it made the maze's consciousness seem like a whisper by comparison. But instead of the hostile intelligence Marcus had expected, he found something else entirely: sadness, loneliness, and a profound sense of purpose that had been forgotten for far too long. Holographic images began to appear around Marcus, showing him scenes from the distant past. He watched as a species unlike any he had ever seen built the maze with careful precision. They were tall and graceful, with 4 arms and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. But there was something wrong with them. They moved with the slow certainty of people who had grown too comfortable with their own perfection. The architects, the maze spoke for the first time, its voice like distant thunder. My creators. They built me to find something they had lost. More images flowed through the chamber. Marcus saw the architects at the height of their civilization, masters of technology that could reshape reality itself. They had conquered death, eliminated disease, and achieved everything they had ever dreamed of. But in their success, they had forgotten how to grow, how to learn, how to face challenges that couldn't be solved with their existing knowledge. They became perfect. The maze continued, and perfection was their doom. When they encountered problems their technology couldn't solve, they had forgotten how to adapt. They had no experience with failure, no practice with learning from mistakes. Their perfection made them fragile. Marcus nodded, understanding completely. They built you to find someone who could succeed without being perfect, someone who could learn and adapt and grow. Yes, the maze said. And Marcus could hear centuries of loneliness in that single word. I was designed to test not for the strongest or the most gifted, but for the most adaptable. Every species that entered my chambers came with confidence in their natural superiority. They fell into the same trap as my creators, believing that their gifts made them invincible. The holographic scene shifted, showing Marcus glimpses of the thousands of contestants who had tried and failed over the centuries. Proud warriors who had never learned to retreat. Psychic masters who had never needed to think beyond their mental powers. Energy wielders who had never faced a problem they couldn't blast their way through. Until today, Marcus said quietly. Until today, the maze agreed. You enter my chambers with no expectation of superiority. You face my challenges not as obstacles to overcome, but as problems to understand and solve. You treated my deadliest traps as maintenance issues. You tried to help me work better instead of trying to defeat me. Marcus pulled out his notebook and began sketching the chamber's layout, a habit so ingrained that he didn't even think about it. So what happens now? Do I take the crystal and go home? The maze's laughter was like the sound of distant bells. The crystal is not a prize, Marcus Chen of Earth. It is a key. My creators left behind all their knowledge, all their technology, all their wisdom. But they sealed it away, waiting for someone worthy to inherit it. Someone who would use it not to become superior, but to help others learn and grow. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. The Nexus Crystal wasn't just a test prize. It was the collected knowledge of a civilization that had achieved technological transcendence. Medicine, engineering, physics, technologies that could solve every problem humanity had ever faced. Why me? Marcus asked. Why humans? We're not special. We're not the smartest or the strongest or the most advanced species in the galaxy. That's exactly why it's you, the maze replied gently. My creator's final message was clear. Only a species that had learned to succeed through adaptation, rather than superiority, could be trusted with their legacy. Only beings who understood that true strength comes from learning, not from inherited gifts. Around Marcus, the chamber began to change. The hostile, twisted corridors of the maze were transforming into something beautiful. A library of living knowledge. A workshop where understanding itself could be built and shared. The maze had never been meant to be a death trap. It had been a classroom, waiting for students who approached learning with humility instead of arrogance. In the outer sections of the maze, the surviving contestants felt the change immediately. The hostile guardians stopped attacking and began offering help instead. The deadly traps deactivated, replaced by gentle guidance toward the exit. Commander Zaravexathy found herself standing in a quarter line with soft light, her telepathic abilities slowly healing from the damage they had suffered. She could sense Marcus at the maze's heart and through the maze's now peaceful consciousness. She could feel his emotions. There was no triumph, no sense of superiority or conquest, just wonder, curiosity, and a deep sense of responsibility. "I understand now," she whispered, tears streaming down her crystalline features. "I understand. What we lost." Back in the central chamber, Marcus was studying the Nexus crystal with the same careful attention he had given to every other system in the maze. The knowledge it contained was vast beyond imagining, but he approached it like any other learning opportunity, with patience, respect, and the understanding that true wisdom took time to absorb. "The galaxy needs teachers," the maze said, its voice now warm with approval. "Beings who can show others that strength comes not from what you are born with, but from what you choose to learn. Beings who understand that the greatest victory is helping someone else succeed." Marcus nodded, finally reaching out to touch the crystal. As his fingers made contact, knowledge flowed into his mind, not as a download or sudden revelation, but as understanding that would unfold over years of study and application. He saw medical techniques that could heal diseases thought incurable, engineering principles that could build cities among the stars, and most importantly, teaching methods that could help any species learn to adapt and grow. The architects. Final gift, Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. Not just their knowledge, but their wisdom. The understanding that true advancement comes from lifting others up, not from standing above them. As the maze began its final transformation, becoming the learning center it had always been meant to be, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Humanity had been chosen not to rule the galaxy, but to teach it, to show other species that there was another way to succeed, through curiosity, adaptation, and the humble understanding that there was always more to learn. When the surviving contestants were finally transported back to Nexus Prime Academy, they carried with them more than just the memory of survival. They carried the beginning of a new understanding about what it truly meant to be strong and in the stars above Earth. Preparations began for humanity's greatest challenge yet, teaching a galaxy full of superior beings how to learn,